What's up, Movement Masters? It's Shawn, Myszka, Movement Master, and OptimizeMovement.com coming to you with another movement lesson. And today's lesson revolves around a topic that I feel needs a much greater and deeper understanding among all movement specialists, because if you don't understand this topic and you don't understand the distinctions that I'm about to point out for you that surround the topic, you can open up a whole can of worms of issues for your athletes and leave them ill-prepared where it counts and where it matters, which is in the sport and in the sport movement. So what I'm talking about today is the idea of developing sport-specific movement skills, change of direction, and agility characteristics for sport demands. Okay? When I come across coaches all the time who claim that they can or that they are developing speed and spending a significant amount of time working on speed and agility characteristics, they talk about sport speed per se, but once I really start to dive deeper into their programming, what it is that they're doing, the exercise and drills and the activities that they're subjecting their athletes to, we all of a sudden see that it becomes very, very apparent that they don't necessarily understand today's topic very well, because if they did, it would change their programming drastically, and therefore it would also change the movement characteristics and abilities that we see from their athletes, that we witness from their athletes when they're in the sport. But yet they often end up coming short, and I believe that it's because they don't understand the distinctions that we're going to find here when we look at the board today. And I know that there's a lot of busyness going on, but this is a big topic and one that I want to kind of help unfold for you, okay? We're going to discuss sport movement from a task-specific, context-dependent fashion, and we're going to discuss it as we do all the time here at Movement Mastery, from that context dependence, knowing that that context of the sport and the sport movement demands and characteristics is really all that matters to us as sport movement specialists. Okay? If we look at the board here and we look over on the left-hand side and we find the task, okay? Remember, we're talking task, specificity, context dependence. We see three separate categories of exercises or distinctions of movement in agility, okay? So we would be talking about things that we're doing for skill acquisition, we're doing pre-programmed or performing pre-programmed types of drills and exercises and activities, or we're using chaotic type movements in order to address our agility needs. So these are essentially our three needs: skill acquisition, pre-programming needs, and then chaotic needs. And in the next category, you can kind of see, or excuse me, not category, the next line here, kind of describing each category, we can see the type of agility movement that this actually is. Obviously, if we're just working for skill acquisition, we're going to find that it's very controlled. We're searching for ownership with all of those types of activities, okay? So here, when we go across the board, we know that, actually if we start here, first off, we know that sport movement ability is going to depend on each one of these proficiency levels and a combination and culmination of all of them in respect to the actual sport movement, okay? But if we look across the top then, we find that skill acquisition is something that's important to us. We're talking basic skill acquisition, as you can see in my example. Acceleration patterns, deacceleration patterns, shuffle patterns, and the like, okay? These are just three specific examples. There's a host of them that we can look to, okay? But that drill area, of course, is essentially used to increase the highest or gain the highest level of proficiency, okay? We're looking for movement refinement if we're talking about a higher level, a more moderate or elite level athlete. We will still perform this skill acquisition to gain proficiency and to increase level of mastery so the movement can get more and more refined so we can use it later on. If we're talking about a lower level of athlete, this area becomes of primary importance and where we spend the majority of our time if we're talking about a lower level of movement mastery athlete, because they don't have the skills acquired yet to be able to perform either one of these sufficiently. Okay, so here we would use it, again, still to increase technical movement mastery, but that would be for a lower level athlete. with any athlete here, the main objective in regards to this category is the acquisition of the simple but very needed movement patterns for sport. So we're looking to adjust the technical execution aspects, looking at things like foot placement and foot strike, as well as then joint position and other kinematic structure issues and considerations. Very vital, important category, okay? But if we only address drills of this area, we're going to come up well short. So we must move on then to the next area, okay? And this, I believe, is where many practitioners and movement specialists go wrong, because they perform countless repetitions of exercises and drills that fit within this category just simply because they have agility in the name, and they think that they're working on sport-specific, movement-specific, and context-dependent agility. But again, really all they are is, when we dive deeper, we're finding that all they are is a rehearsal of technical movement combinations and movement patterning. Still fantastic, still needed, but it's still rehearsal, and it's still being done in a pre-programmed, closed environment. Pre-programmed fashion, closed environment, even if it says agility in the name. Okay? So, but these drills are needed because they start to allow us to take some of these skills that we acquired up here, or that we refined up here, and put them into patterns of technical movement combinations. Okay? So here, it's a great conduit between here and here. Okay? Or between making sure that we have control and ownership to in a controlled setting to more of one in an open, chaotic setting. We must kind of get that athlete accustomed to using patterns in order to overcome the challenges in their environment. Okay, so the athlete get used to combining these technical movement actions into those patterns, and then we see that we must take that next step, because these are simply rehearsal drills. They're not agility. Okay, so if that's where we stop, we're never going to be able to necessarily see the full culmination of everything that we desire when that athlete gets out in the sport. We often see them lose control when chaos enters the mix then, okay? But of course we know that sport is chaos, so ultimately we must get to this point. And now before we get there, I want to make the note that depending on the level of sport movement mastery will determine then how much time we spend in each one of these respective three categories in order to improve that athlete's level of movement mastery, okay? So before we get there, I wanted to make that quick mention that the amount of time that we're going to spend in each one of these is going to differ depending on level of mastery, okay? And that we can see where their weaknesses are, okay? So finally, when we get to this bottom point, we see this open environment, we see the chaotic stimuli. In here, we have to spend sufficient time, okay? But we have had to have sufficient time spent in each one of these categories, these two categories above, before we can ever expect the most technically efficient display in the chaotic in an open environment, okay? If we rush to that point right off the bat, we're going to end up with some compensations, and we're going to ingrain more bad habits and behaviors than we do with good ones, okay? So we need to spend sufficient time in each one of these categories, but once we do, we can then move on to the chaotic and open environment. And here we see sport movement qualities and characteristics kind of come to light for us, okay? This is true agility at its best. It's in a reactive setting, and it utilizes anticipation and perception and information processing of the brain and the feedback system, and then decision making, which will translate to utilizing the best technical movement combination and strategy and display, but translated in a very sport context dependent fashion, as you can see here with some of these types of drills and exercises and examples. We could be playing a shadow game, tag games, cat and mouse, or practicing the competitive sport. And then we would encourage the use of these rehearsal drills in each one of these activities, so we can start to get what we would refer to as reactive agility, where the athlete must process, they must problem solve, and then utilize the best execution in order to overcome the stimuli of the open environment, the chaotic stimuli in that open environment. But this is really where everything comes to light for us, and we got to get to that point with most sports, okay? Because we know that most sports fit within this environment right there. But because of the overriding importance level of things that go into this reactive agility, in this sport relevant movement mastery, in the chaotic and open environment, those things that I had already talked about, such as anticipation and perception and information processing and things of that sort. Those things are vitally important in order to make sure that we're able to display the most optimal movement strategy in order to overcome the chaotic stimuli. We find that an athlete could be very, very proficient in one area, okay, but we might not see it being placed down here until they've gotten sufficient time raising their level of movement mastery, because this is the category where true sport movement mastery should be determined by. Okay, so athletes who are great in a closed change of direction or closed agility or closed speed type task doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be the most efficient and most effective when they're in this bottom category in task. So that's why it's important to understand the distinctions between each one of them, because we must spend appropriate amount of time, effort, and focus investigating our athletes in each one of the environment, and make sure that any day that we have programmed and prescribed to work within one of these categories, that we're going to focus on the right things. So for another movement lesson, this has been Shawn, Myszka, OptimizeMovement.com and Movement Mastery. I'll talk to you guys on the flip side. Till next time, let's all continue to master the art of optimizing movement.